So welcome to the webinar series on building resilient cities. Our webinar today is on urban resilience from the viewpoint of disaster risk reduction. My name is Vaishnavi and I'll be your moderator today. I work on the Knowledge Networks Initiative at the Urban Resilience Unit in NIUA, and I'm excited to be hosting this session today. For those who are joining us for the first time, I would like to briefly introduce our unit. The Urban Resilience Unit is established in collaboration with 100 Resilient Cities program pioneered by the Rockefeller Foundation and the National Institute of Urban Affairs for promoting and supporting the development of resilient cities across India. I also have my colleagues from the unit, Ashali, Mahesh, who's the chair, and few other colleagues from NIU who are joining us today. I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Professor Rajib Shaw, who's a professor in the Graduate School of Media and Governance in Keio University, Japan, and is the co-founder of Resilience Innovation Knowledge Academy, RIKA in short. He's also the Senior Fellow of Institute of Global Environmental Strategies, Japan, and the Chairperson of SEEDS Asia and CWS Japan, two Japanese NGOs. Earlier, he was the Executive Director of the Integrated Research on Disaster Risk and was a professor in Kyoto University. His expertise includes disaster governance, community-based disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, urban risk management, and disaster and environmental education. Professor Shaw is the chair of the United Nations Science Technology Advisory Group for Disaster Risk Reduction and also the co-chair of the Asia Science Technology Academic Advisory Group. He is also the coordinating lead author for Asia chapter of IPCC's 6th Assessment Report. Professor Shah is the editor-in-chief of the Elsevier Journal, Progress in Disaster Science, and series editor of a Springer book series on disaster risk reduction, and has published more than 45 books and over 300 academic papers and book chapters. A very warm welcome to Professor Rajib Shah. Today, Professor is going to illustrate a holistic approach to address urban resilience under 5 dimensions, being physical, social, economic, institutional, and natural. Before I hand it over to Professor Shaw, I have a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover before we move on about the presentation and the platform. So today's webinar will be made available online in the next few days on the website, which is uru.niua.org. Next, we'd love to hear from you all during the presentation today. So if you all have any questions for our speaker, please type it in the chat box and we'll get to the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And lastly, we'd like to encourage you to share your today's webinar with your social networks. You can use the hashtag Urban Resilience Unit to tag us while you're at it, and also follow us for regular updates. And at last, I would request all of you all to mute your audio feed so there's no disturbance during the presentation. In case you all face any IT issues, you can also turn off your video feed if you all have any issues. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us. And without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our speaker, Professor Shaw. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. Okay, let me go to, can you see my slide, the first slide?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure, and I see some familiar names who have joined. I see also GIDM and a group of people in GIDM with whom actually we are also working on some urban issues. So it's really a pleasure, and I understand that there are possibly a couple of participants outside India as well. Thank you also, Vaishnavi, for giving the introduction, and whatever you have mentioned is actually in this first slide, and more of my work can be seen in these two websites, rajibshaw.org and rikaindia.com. Well, let me go directly to the context, which is the cities and risk. You know that these are possibly well researched and well talked, well discussed context. There are, of course, many different issues on the urban affairs or the urban related things. But when it comes to the risk perspective, I would like to highlight a few points, which is in mostly it's like mostly relevant to the developing world. That I think when we talk about the urban resilience, we always need to discuss this coexistence of contrast. What do you say? Like these are the photos from very familiar city to most of you, which is Mumbai. On left hand side, what you see is the high skyscraper and possibly one of the most expensive residential and commercial area. And on the right hand side, what we see is the informal settlement. So it's not only in Mumbai, we have seen this in many other cities, be it in Jakarta, be it in Bangkok, be it in Manila, be it in Hanoi or some others, even in Dhaka, Karachi, and so on. So my first point here is the coexistence of contrast. Like we need to think about both the formal settlement as well as informal and addressing the risk. And a few statistics that, well, our urban population has increased. Now more than 60% of the population live in 3% of the land area. So that obviously enhances lots of pressure in the urban area. The migration, the daily migration, seasonal migration are major issues. Then on the disaster side, like the increasing climate-related hazards are very prominent, and especially it has been very highlighted in 1.5 degree report of IPCC last year, and the inspired means which actually highlights very importantly that in spite of all mitigation efforts, there would be increasing hot days in the summer, heavy precipitation in the rainy season, and possibly stronger typhoon. We have seen just last week a major typhoon, the super cyclone Fani, which hit the east coast of India. So possibly what we call this extreme event, these like what we have now, science says that these extreme events are no more extreme anymore. So these are possibly sort of new normal, what we say. So it is happening maybe more frequently. Now let's go to when addressing this overall resilience, cities, risk and resilience. Means there are many different framework. I just try to use a few elements from our own research over past 20 years or so. So I will talk about on the governance issue. I will talk a little bit on the education in the urban area. And I will talk, which is also very important these days, is the use of technology. So mainly my main presentation will follow this structure, the governance, education and technology, and that's what we call this GET framework or GET framework of addressing urban areas resilience. Some of you might are aware who have been following our group's research that this is a methodology we call the CDRI, Climate and Disaster Resilience Methodology, which we developed over a period of close to 7 years. And then we applied this methodology in 36 different cities in Asia Pacific region. And one of the main trigger of this methodology, like when I've been working with many UN systems for many years, and sometimes means I worked for the UN internally for 5 years, but then outside, being an outsider, but working with the UN and also the bank. And through this type of projects, when you talk to the local government leader or even the local government mayors, I think most of the local government manager or the policymakers or the mayors, they understand the city's problems, city's risk. But what is possibly required is how we disaggregate this whole concept of resilience into the city services. Because city services are the places where there are city budget to be used. And those are possibly the entry point to have very specific actions at the city or sub-city or the community level. So with that motivation or with that trigger in mind, this particular methodology try to disaggregate resilience into 5 dimensions: physical, social, economic, institutional, and natural. Physical part is more on the infrastructure, which is on electricity, water, sanitation, solid waste, road, housing, and land use. The social is more on the communities, economic is more on the income, employment, assets, etc. Institutional is the governance part, and the natural is more the hazards, its intensity, frequency, then ecosystems, environment, policies, and so on. So we call this 555 matrix. So this 5 dimension, then 5 primary indicators, which are this electricity, water, and then under each of these primary indicators, there are another 5 secondary indicators. So in total, for a city, we try to collect for 125 variables and try to make an average weighted mean of these. And these are some of the examples. I will show you several ways of representing the result. I won't go much into the details of the methodology. There are quite a bit of if you contact me, I can later send you the paper. So these are some of those are also available in our website. You can have a look at that. So this is what we worked in quite long back, actually, 2010. We worked with NIDM, National Institute of Disaster Management, on some cities' vulnerabilities in India. And we tried to, like, these are what you see here: Bhubaneswar, Delhi, Shimla, Jaipur. And we try to categorize these cities on different natures, because India is a vast country. Some of the cities are in the mountain cities, in the hilly area, some are the coastal, some are possibly the riverside or dry cities, or some are in the arid area. So you have seen we have seen like how Bhubaneswar was affected in the last cyclone. Of course, compared to other cities here, Bhubaneswar had relatively lower the overall resilience. But if you see the natural resilience part, this is quite strong. On the contrary, if it is, say, for example, in Shimla, the natural resilience is quite low. So, I mean, this is just an example that how we can show the result. And my point of highlight here is that if we have a larger number of cities, say, for example, 100 cities in India, and then if we can categorize them, and then possibly we can make a statistical analysis that what are the different types of resilience based on the locations, based on the size, based on the nature of the cities, like whether it is a residential, whether it is a commercial cities, and so on. So this is one way of looking at the cities in one country. The other approach of this particular methodology is like when we have cluster of cities. So these are, we worked in Metro Manila, which is a cluster of 17 cities and municipalities. And it's called the NCR, the National Capital Region of Philippines. And what is interesting here that I have highlighted with a small bar here that the city, say for example, this city, this has a relatively high physical resilience, but the economic resilience is quite low, natural resilience is moderate. So if we have to focus on this particular city, which is Navotas, possibly our main target would be how we can enhance the economic resilience in the city, rather than focusing on the physical infrastructure or focusing on possibly the institutional mechanism. Even in the Metro Manila, like there is a MMDA, Metro Manila Development Agency, which is actually like a cluster of all these different cities, and they oversee the development planning of the 17 cities and municipalities. For this type of analysis is very useful for them, and possibly this is also applicable for many of the other capital region, which are often found the clusters of cities. This is one example from Bandung in Indonesia, where like how you present the city city analysis, and these are again like if you say in Bandung, for example, if we want to focus on the physical resilience, possibly sanitation and solid waste management is the key area where we need to start. On the contrary, if we want to start in the economic resilience, possibly finance, savings, and the budget and subsidy are the two important elements. So there are, what I'm trying to here emphasize, that there are many ways of representing or showing this analysis and try to influence the decision-making process in the city level. So in Bandung, what we have found in that out of these 25 parameters, these are the top 5 parameters which possibly Bandung has a very strong emphasis, or they can possibly rely on when they think about the resilience concept. Is it the health? Bandung has a very good healthcare system, their electricity supply, social capital, water, and institutional collaboration. But on the other hand, there are 5 bottom parameters, which is sanitation, solid waste, ecosystem, finance, frequency, and budget and subsidy. Of course, frequency of hazard, we don't have any control on that, but other elements possibly we can try to emphasize. So this type of analysis tells us where to prioritize our resources and how we can actually make more impact with our limited resources for a city's resilience. And these are the spatial distribution. This is again from Bandung. So earlier I showed in this particular slide, I showed this is the overall city map or overall city analysis. But when we go, as we all understand that the city is very non-homogeneous. Every city has a core area, the new development area, some commercial area, some mixed area, some residential area, and so on. So based on that, possibly the city's resilience nature is also quite different. So this shows the spatial distribution. And again, an interesting is that what you are seeing in the overall, which is the orange color, and I have put one dot, and there are 30 total the sub-district in Bandung municipality. So if you see in this particular dotted area, which is in the southeastern part, that particular sub-district, the physical resilience is relatively low, but the economic, the natural, the social, and the institutional resilience are moderate to high. So for this particular sub-district, I think we need to focus more on the infrastructure development or the physical resilience. And similarly, there are other characters of each of the sub-districts. Also, I would like to highlight here that the city's resilience is it's not a static one. It's always change over time. And many times, like we make an analysis, but often we fail to upload or update that particular analysis with the new sets of data. So here we have worked in 10 cities, and this was a part of our project with an organization called CityNet, which is the mayor's network in the Asia Pacific, as well as World Bank Tokyo office. So we worked for 3 years, and we tried to look at this time series analysis of the cities, the same cities of these 8. I would like to just highlight the city of Hue, which is a central Vietnamese city. It's a coastal city of around 1 million population. If you see that in this particular table, the left-hand column is the overall resilience and the difference between 2010 and 2013. If you see that most of the cities have higher resilience in these 3 years, except Hue, where the overall resilience has decreased from 3.87 to 3.75. Now, if we look at the breakdown of this data, the physical resilience has increased. So that means there has been some improvement, not that much, but some improvement on the physical resilience. But the social, institutional, and very importantly, the natural resilience has a very strong decrease. The social and institutionals were two main reasons, because there were quite a bit of migration from the rural to urban area in this particular city, and there are new communities which have come out, so that actually contributed to a little bit lower down of the social resilience. Institutional resilience, there was some sort of corruption issue, and the mayor had to actually step down in between these 3 years. So there were some issues related to the governance system, and that actually influenced the institutional part. But the natural one, and here the main three components which actually contribute very significantly, is the intensity of hazard, frequency of hazard, and land use in natural terms. These are the three factors which actually brought down the overall natural resilience. And then if we see the data here, that within this 3 year, there have been two major flooding, 2011 and 2012, and one major typhoon which hits in the central Vietnam in this particular city. So my point here is that while it is important to invest in the physical resilience, but we possibly need to also look, or possibly we need to have a balanced approach of all other different components of the resilience. And this is a very dynamic process, and the proper monitoring or the periodic monitoring is very, very important. These are some of the land use changes in the city. So with those analyses, then we went a little bit more on the governance part, which is the action planning, because assessment is one, but then what we do. So these were an action plan example from Chennai. With the local government and that time Chennai has 10 zones. So with the zone officers, we develop this type of short-term, medium-term, and long-term actions, and which are again related to very specific these resilience components. Say, for example, the waste component, involvement of the communities into waste segregation practices, then the electricity component, saving of energy and increasing the use of solar power, and so on, the building codes and so on. So again, I emphasize here that the overall resilience is one part, but to disaggregate that resilience and link it to different city services so that the city can actually have specific budget to link to this type of activities, I think that's very, very important. And we proposed in the city senate, and it has been published and got a stamp of the mayor, and that actually helps the line managers to use the funding for some of the actions, especially the short-term actions in the next year budget and so on. So with that little bit outlining of this assessing climate disaster resilience, let me go another part of this, which is the governance part, is the community governance and the social capital. Again, an example from Mumbai. Some of you are possibly aware about this one, that Mumbai had started a system called Advanced Locality Management, and that was started almost 20 years back, 1998. And this was started as a part of solid waste management program. Of course, I understand that no program is perfect. There are always positive side of a program. There are also criticism about different types of program, and there are scope of improvement. We always need to keep in mind that there are always scope of improvement of this program. We did some analysis of this ALM. In total, there were around 800 ALM which were registered under the city. So these are small community bodies with certain criteria provided by the municipal corporation. So if they meet that particular criteria, and that one of the important criteria is that it's not just the colony or the formal part of the one road in the both side, they need to come out together. So it's a combination of the formal and informal sector together to take care of some of their activities in the neighborhood level. And so totally around the 783 registered ALM, and the city office provides them some small thing like the brooms or some dustbin and so on. So it's essentially very specifically focusing on the solid waste management. But what I found there, that with the involvement of the formal and informal society together, I think that really helped some new entrepreneurship in the informal sector, and especially the waste recycle or waste segregation, and then linking it with that how you segregate the waste and then how you actually sell those waste to get some money out of that one. So that becomes a small income generation part. But the good part is that in after the 2005 flooding, we did some assessment, and we found that we could reach around 170 plus registered ALM, and it was found that the ALMs which were very active, there were less damage, or there were less at least casualty, because again they were active. That means that they had more information in the local level, so they knew that whom to rescue or whom to where possibly the old persons or the pregnant lady or even a handicapped persons are there. So the rescue operations was good. That's number one. And number two is as a part of the solid waste management, and that's actually a major problem not only for Mumbai, for many other Indian cities, or even I will say many other possibly Southeast Asia cities, that the major problem of this inundation flooding is that the drainage system, and one is the lack of proper drainage system, and whatever drainage is there, it's already full with this waste. So in some of the ALM they have to do, they used to do actually this drainage cleaning before the monsoon season, and that actually helps. So my main learning from this experience is that we often say that in a big city, in a mega city, people are all very busy and they don't have enough time for community activity. But my learning from this particular example is that yes, it is a mega city. It's a 20 million people living there. But ultimately, this is a cluster of small communities and neighborhoods. And if we can develop a proper mechanism, governance mechanism to engage them and to engage this community leader, and if they have certain level of incentive to participate, I think it's very much possible to address this urban resilience. And here again, I say that the entry point for this urban resilience for this particular example was the solid waste management. If we talk about flooding, earthquake preparedness, these are possibly not the priority things usually for the citizen or even for the local government. But solid waste is a daily problem. So how we can find the daily problem of that particular community or that particular city and then try to link it with other disaster related issues, I think that's a major learning from here. And another very similar example is from Kobe in Japan, the city which was hit by 1995, a major earthquake, and there were 6,400 people lost their life. I lived in Kobe personally for almost 5.5 years, and we participated actually in some of this program very strongly. What they have developed, the Kobe city government, is the whole city is distributed, or the whole city is divided into 191 school districts. So school district means that there are the elementary school, there are 191 elementary school, and the people who are living 2 kilometers of the radius of that particular school, they are entitled to go in that particular, their children are entitled to go into that particular school. This is for the government school. So in this school district, and this is a general system in all over Japan, so there they formed this small committee. And this committee actually represents the residents. It's around 20 members, good gender balance, the age balance, and so on. And then they call this BOKOMI in Japanese, which is Boshai Fukushi Community, Disaster Preparedness and Social Welfare Community. And that's possibly another very interesting part which I learned from this experience, that disasters, even the city which has hit by a major disaster, which has seen this major damage, but people's priority actually is not always the disaster preparedness, and it actually fades down. But how you actually engage them with the daily needs, which is the social welfare, I think that is one of the key things. So here, the disaster preparedness and the social welfare were clubbed together. We did lots of evaluation of this type of programs, and there are quite a bit of papers, and I can share with you if you are interested. But again, the point is that it took them almost 13 years to reach all the 191. With the graph which you are seeing here, they started in 1995 with 11, and then to reach all the school district, it took 13 years. So again, it's not a magic, it's not a miracle that with a 2-year project, with a 3-year project, everything will be changed. But urban resilience work, it needs a very long-term commitment and a long-term attachment with the local community, with the local government, and so on. So let me go quickly with my last two parts, which are the education. This is a classic example from Mumbai, from Varanasi. And this was a project actually we started after PM Modi's first visit to Japan. And he started this visit from a city called Kyoto. And that time Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Modi, they signed a sort of agreement which is called Kyoto Kashi Partnership Agreement. So under this agreement, we did it with financial assistance from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we just completed the first phase in this December, last year December, and we had one workshop. I think one representative from NIUA was also there in the final workshop in Delhi. What we try to do here is more focusing on the participatory action learning. And we developed or established what we call the climate school. And what is climate school is that we put this automated weather station and pollution monitoring, some very simple monitoring equipment in the school, and then engage the student and teacher to look at the daily records of the temperature, rainfall, wind speed, and so on, to make a note of that and try to make some sort of preparedness. And also, we actually provided them also the 1 year before record as well, and try to compare that, okay, if it was last year July or last year June, what was the temperature and how it is changing, or how much was the rainfall. So again, the main target was like, instead of just providing a lecture on the climate change education, on disaster education, this is something actually they take the measurement, they go, and then, so it's more like engaging. And then we also developed a computer app, and the name is Be Safe. BE is Benaras, and hyphen safe. So Benaras Safe. And so this is what you are seeing here in the bottom side. So there is a computer app which was developed, and now it is used by close to 1,200, I guess, 1,200 students actually, and some of their parents as well. And again, it's like knowing the risk, then understanding the risk, and taking specific action of the risk. So with this app, like we have some small action that what they are taking. Say for example, during this type of summer, I was in Varanasi a couple of weeks back, and it was quite hot, and I actually visited some of the school and saw that how they are using this particular app. And if like in a hot day, whether they are having enough water, whether they are having a cap, whether they are wearing full sleeve dresses, and that actually, if they actually do all these things, so they get a point, and then if they can accumulate this point during the summer time, and after the summer vacation is over, then there is a check by the teachers that what they have done so far. So this is like, again, engaging them, so they get a medal, and then they go to the next level, so there is a bronze medal, and then it can go up to the platinum level, and so on. So again, like to engage the student, and there was this small science communication thing, so this is the students' newsletter, so they try to develop, and this actually we worked with the local newspaper and the local journalist group, and they actually helped the teachers, and every time once the best article which is written by the student, and that article will be actually published in the local newspaper. So there were two or three local newspaper, both in English and Hindi. So these were published like that. So it's again the engaging the students, and with the participatory learning process is very, very important. And this was a citizen promotion activity. We also worked with NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, which is they have the 11th Battalion there. So this particular citizen activity center we developed, that was in the top of this NDRF building. And there what you are seeing here is the model of the buildings along the Ganges. And the idea is that the students will come, and each of the school is allocated certain area. So they will actually mark that particular area, that what was the inundation in last year, flooding and so on. And there are some other educational materials like that. So this is what on the education, and my final maybe couple of slides are on the technology. So this is getting actually quite popular, I think, this type of methodology, like how you can use the AI and the virtual reality in some cases to actually get the inundation level, and use the citizen science approach, like engage the local communities to get the data from the inundation. And like many other cities, this was also we tested in Varanasi initially with a Japanese company called Fujitsu, and we developed a small system where actually through your mobile phone you can take, like say for example, in most of the time we don't have a measure. So either you take the tire, different types of tire, and it's called customization. So depending on, so we have this coding that blue, yellow, or red. And also there were a few lamp posts in the city where we have actually made what you see in the right hand side, blue, yellow, and red color. And that color and that particular photograph, when you upload it, it actually reflects. And ultimately, like one of my dreams for this particular project, which I must confess that I have not been able to do that yet because we need more data. Like when you see this Google map, and there are this traffic information, like if it is a very heavy traffic, you see this red on the Google map. Sometimes it is orange. So what we try to do here, that the inundation level of the city can, if it can be actually transferred to the Google map, that can actually help quite a bit for this traffic management. So it is again a very simple system. We worked initially with the DDMA, District Disaster Management Authority in Varanasi. They actually helped us. Then with the climate school, and so the schools, they were actually measuring this. And then with augmented reality, so AR type of the climate school, so we try to actually make the measurements and so on. But this is still in the process, and again, it's not a very difficult system. But what I found is the importance of this applicability, and I'm sure that there are many this type of good technology usage at different level, and possibly we need to look at this type of new technologies. In Japan, we have been using this type of AI-based AI-based citizen science approach in the cities and so on. So my final slide here, that I once again go back to where I started. This for urban area, this coexistence thing is extremely important. Unless we make it as a holistic approach of both the informal and formal settlements, is very difficult to solve this issue, and it's a dynamic process. The disaggregation of the resilience to the city services is important. We need possibly different types of entry point. I just mentioned the two examples. One is the solid waste management in Mumbai, and the social welfare in case of Kobe. So there are, every city has some sort of entry point. So we need to finalize. We need to find that one. And ultimately, it's our behavior which matters. So, and our behavior possibly doesn't change over time or in one day. So, this climate school, like that at least what I have seen is that we are many times, many of the South Asian countries, to look at the weather carefully every day. It's not a habit. So how we can actually make a little bit of behavioral or little bit of aware ourselves about whether today will be rain or today whether it will be a sunny day or what will be the temperature, what will be the pollution. We see possibly now the AQI index only in the winter, but possibly in the summertime we don't check that carefully. But I think we need to make it an habit, and the behavioral change, and which comes from a participatory action learning, is very important. And finally, there are lots of new and appropriate technologies, which are possibly, which are still, we say these new technology, but I think gradually these are possibly becoming essential technologies. So with that, I will stop here, and I see 15 minutes, so I'll be happy to get any questions and comments.
Thank you, Professor Shaw, for demonstrating the methodology for assessing climate disaster resilience and I guess mostly emphasizing the role of citizens and in some cases communities who play as change agents and can strengthen the resilience building process. So I guess taking this from here, we have a question from one of our audience, Tami from Indonesia, who is an NDMA officer but currently studying in Netherlands. So hers is a two-part question. The first one is about the tools for assessing city resilience. And she is saying that most of these end up as recommendations. But how do we transfer these into action plans, considering the local leaders may change in every few years? That is the first question. And the second question is about how these tools can have an impact on the low educated people as such, basically who don't have access to these tools, and how they can play a role in building resilience.
Do I take some more questions and reply? Or?
Yes. Yes, I think the other question is a data-related question for the first part of the presentation, asking if you can elaborate on the data that was used as weightages for the CDRI parameters.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the questions. I think the first one is, that this is always the critical issue, is that the local leader is changed, and we don't have any control on that, and that's a system that we have a good rapport with a mayor, we become very good friend, he is very energetic, and then after 5 years we saw that the mayor is possibly somewhere else and there is a new mayor, and then you have to start by doing that, and we have to actually face this problem, and this is everywhere. But by saying that, this particular tool is not just recommendation, and as I mentioned, or as I tried to show an example from Chennai, that these were very specifically disaggregated into actionable item, because it's very, very important that a colleague from Indonesia pointed out that many of the projects or many of this type of analysis ends up with recommendations, and we were very much aware about that, and that's the reason this action planning part was very, very important for this whole project or this whole assessment process. It's not only just assessing the problem, but how we can actually link this problem for taking some action, and more importantly, that where the budget comes from. So unless we disaggregate this, and that I re-emphasized several times, that we disaggregate this resilience into very specific actionable items which can be taken up by different departments, and those departments which are have the budget. And that's why it was very important for us to get it approved in the city senate as the official document. So our role was more as a technical support and some sort of technical facilitation, but there was a legal aspect of it which was actually engaged the city senate, which is the highest decision-making body, and when it got legalized, then possibly the use of the funding and to turn it into specific action is very, very important. The data part is so what we try to do, I mean, there are, as I mentioned, that there are quite a bit of literature available on the details of this methodology. So, for example, for the electricity, I'll just give you one example of the electricity, how the data was collected. So, say, for example, in the electricity, there were 5 specific, again, points. Like one is the non-interruption of the electricity during a climatic hazard. Then how much percentage of the city's electricity, or how much percentage of the city residences have the legal access to the electricity. And we have this different, so like 10 to 15%. 15 to 20% and so on. And then we try to get some data from the city where the city data are available and where the city data are not available. And that's a major problem in most of the developing country, that there are not a ready-made data set. So there we try to have a consensus approach with a group of 4 or 5 people. And as I mentioned, the zonal officials from the city, and they were possibly know their own zones, which are the sub-city level, so that we had a consensus approach of that. So that's on the data part. And then how the poor people have access to this tool. This particular tool is not directly for the poor people or rich people. This particular tool, which I mentioned, climate disaster resilient analysis, this is for the local government to use. And in many cases, I gave an example of 36. I mentioned that 36 cities in the Asia Pacific. We try to work with this particular tool. Of course, the response from city to city were different. Not all the cities were very proactive, but there were some cities, say for example, Makati in Philippines, they actually use this tool. And then they actually asked, there are around 36 sub-district, or what we call barangay in Makati. And so the Makati city government actually asked all the sub-district to use this particular tool and collect the data and make a proper regular assessment tool periodically. Thank you.
Professor, our next question is on the, you'd mentioned about the time series analysis and that we have to look at assessing all of these factors on a regular basis. So related to that, the question is, what are the ways, or maybe how do we capture the real-time data, like in the cities that we are, like in cities which are so dynamic? So are there any specific ways, or how do we go about capturing this data?
Nowadays it's rather easy in most of the cities that they have the access to at least the basic computer system. And if we have this type of tool, we actually did it in some parts of Japan as well, a similar type of approach, but with the education board, and especially in Tohoku region after the East Japan earthquake and tsunami. So what we did is that we developed this particular system, the data input system. So ideally, if we can get it every year as a check, it's very good. But we also understand that possibly not all the cities can actually give or input the data every year. So that's why we try to say that at least once in every 2 years or once in every at least 3 years is possibly a better time frame. And to input the data, like there are this particular tool is very easy to actually calculate. You don't need a very high-tech computer skill or high-tech analytical skill. It's just the very simple Excel sheet which possibly can be filled up, and then you can make the analysis. So in that way, I think this how we the main problem which I find here is when you talk about this time series data and the regular interval, unless it actually goes into the city's governance structure, department to actually handle this one, or very difficult for the department to regularly update this one. So the challenge is that what will be the best governance mechanism to put this into the city system? I think that will be one of the key elements. And for that, city to city will have possibly a different approach. Possibly in some cities, planning department is more stronger and they oversee, and then based on that, possibly they actually allocate the budget. That can be possibly one way, but for some cities, maybe some other approaches.
So I'll take the liberty to ask the next question. So I could be wrong, but what I understand is most cities, or rather even communities, are open, or rather more proactive to build resilience to disasters when they've already faced disasters, maybe on a regular basis. But the cities or maybe the communities who haven't, but they have a projection saying these are your risks, but they haven't faced, but how do we get them on board to build resilience? I take that example from Kobe where you spoke about disaster preparedness and social welfare. So I take that as one learning as to how we can have these connections. But are there any other thoughts that you can maybe suggest as to how we can bring this in?
I think, yeah, this is always a challenge, and but nowadays, I think with like 20 years back, possibly this was a good excuse that okay, a city which have not experienced a disaster may not be that willing to participate in some sort of preparedness program. But I think with the current information age and the different types of media, what we are available, all the new media, I think the information or experience is, means there are more scopes actually to disseminate, to share, to widen this information. And first is, of course, to motivate a city. The information from the similar type of city is very, very important. But then, of course, as I mentioned, that every city has some sort of pulse, some sort of character. So, as the city manager or as the resilience expert, I think it will be our duty or our responsibility try to understand, not to give a ready-made approach or ready-made sort of prescription for all the cities, but to try to understand the pulse of that particular city and try to see that what are the key elements or what are the key daily issues which the cities are facing, and where the community's needs or community's willingness to contribute their own time is there. And I think that more or less this solid waste management, noise pollution, air pollution, the social welfare, health related issues, these are possibly a few common issues in most of the developing country cities. But again, where the communities are willing actually to invest their time. So my answer would be possibly we need to be more sensitive to understand the nature of the city, the pulse of the city, and customize our solution based on that particular nature. And that will actually give us the right entry point.
So I guess again going back to the digital and the technologies oriented question, as in what are your thoughts regarding frontier technologies for enhancing resilience, specifically how to cope with challenges like the digital divide and new technological hazards per se?
Yeah, that's actually a real challenge. That's a real challenge, especially you uttered a very important point, digital divide. Just to give you an example, that for last 2.5 years, my university in Keio, along with Line is like the WhatsApp. This is the most popular social media network in Japan, almost 70 million subscribers. So Line, Facebook, Yahoo, and SoftBank SoftBank. SoftBank is the SIM card or the mobile provider. And our university, we have been working on this artificial intelligence and its application to the disaster risk reduction. And I have been attending these meetings and we had a drill actually using this artificial intelligence just last year actually in some parts of Tokyo. But the main problem still in Japan being a very sort of disaster prone country as well as where the technology is quite developed, still we have a very, very big digital divide because every time who are the most vulnerable are the aged population in Japan, and with a very strong aging society where like once I was doing a field work and I was asking in that particular community that what is the aged population, and this gentleman looked at me and he told that what are you asking? I am 73 and I am the youngest in my community. So that's actually in many of the Japanese society the level of aged population, and they are not tuned with different types of technology. So my pitch to all these groups like the big groups or like Facebook, Yahoo, Line and all these things. So I always try to emphasize that unless we simplify frontier technology to the user perspective, I think we won't be able to break this digital divide. So the challenge is not to have a frontier technology, but challenge is possibly to bring this frontier technology more accessible to the most vulnerable people. And even in Japan also, it's still, I think we are much behind that to achieve that particular goal. So I know that there is no specific answer to this particular question, but my comment here is that I really I agree with you fully that this is a major problem of the digital divide for the frontier technology, and we need to work very strongly on this.
Thank you, Professor. I think we have come to an end of this exciting hour of learning, and so this is the last webinar of the series. We follow academic cycle, the Indian academic cycle. So our next series will begin in July. So I'd like to thank all our participants for joining today and contributing to this stimulating Q&A session. So we at URU look forward to your continued participation in the next series as well. And a special thank you to Professor Rajib Shah for making this webinar a success. I'd request all the participants to maybe follow us on Twitter with the hashtag Urban Resilience Unit for further updates. And maybe also log on to a webinar if you want to access our website if you want to access the webinar at a later period. Thank you all once again and have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.